Welcome to the Business of School podcast, brought to you by Cole Connect. Get ready for a journey of topical insights, engaging conversations, and maybe a few aha moments from the business, finance, and technology side of schools. Cole School experts are your host, and with our guests from the world of education, we're about to embark on a learning adventure to support you in the business of your school. Damien Hoffman has nearly 25 years of banking experience, including client relationship management, operations, risk and organisational redesign roles. For over a decade, Damien has been a member of NAB's Government, Education and Community Specialised Banking Division, with independent and Catholic schools being a key component of that portfolio. The insights and experience from Damien's banking career are supplemented by his not-for-profit board experience within the community housing sector, and he is currently the chair of the advisory board for a school within the Brisbane Catholic Archdiocese. Welcome, Damien, to the podcast today on the Business of School. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Kenton. Appreciate the invite and look forward to the discussion.
Same, likewise. And maybe we can start off looking from the bank's perspective at NAB. What are some of the key financial challenges that you're seeing that schools are facing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you think about finances, obviously there's two sides of the coin. One's the income and one's the expenses. From an income perspective, key challenge for schools is around fee affordability in the current environment. Typically, enrollments for schools, we're seeing are pretty strong and holding up well. And I think that's a result of schools making a conscious and concerned effort to ensure that they're focusing on fee affordability. So that's worked well to date, but there's got to be questions around the ability to continue doing that into the future as costs continue to grow. And I guess that's the other side of the equation is around expenses. Definitely over the last few years, we've seen rising costs, operational development costs, and that's really putting capacity or challenges on schools' bottom lines. And from a banking perspective, that does flow on to project feasibility and borrowing capacity to support those projects. So that's one thing we're definitely seeing in terms of that challenge around school finances. As a consequence of that, there's a flow-on effect where schools are needing to kind of reassess priorities in terms of where they do allocate their resources in an environment where those resources are getting a little bit constrained.
Yeah. Where are those priorities changing from to at the moment?
Yeah, well, if you think, well, from our perspective, in terms of what we're seeing with schools or the way that we work with schools, a lot of what we do with them is around, development financing for construction projects. So certainly some schools have needed to reconsider potentially the scale of a project, and also the timing of a project, or if they've got a master plan and they'd initially thought, we'll do A, B, and C, maybe they need to reorder those projects to kind of allow it to work within the capacity that they've currently got.
Mm-hmm. And what about, you've talked about income and expenditure challenges. What about the staffing challenge that schools are definitely having to face at the moment? We're seeing that all the time. Yes, it's across all industries, but what are you seeing specifically schools are having to face in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a challenge. And look, it's not something that's new this year. It's been there for a while. And there's no secret that, the reality is being an educator is a rewarding job, but it's also a challenging job. And the expectations of educators in the current environment of students, of families, of the broader community is probably higher than it's ever been in terms of the educational side of what they do, but the more holistic pastoral care element of what they deliver to students also. So it is challenging for teachers, and we know that there are instances where some teachers have left the industry because it's kind of not what it was, or the challenges of what it presents now.
The stats on that are quite alarming, aren't they? Especially in the forecasts going forward over the next few years.
Yeah, 100%. So with that as well, I think what's really important for schools and some examples that we've seen are rethinking, what's been done traditionally. Like obviously, when you've got a school, you've got teachers up in front of a classroom. you're kind of limited to an extent in terms of the flexibility that you can provide. But there certainly are avenues that some schools are taking in terms of managing timetabling, looking at more flexible work arrangements. Interestingly, my two kids both currently have job share arrangements with their teachers, which works really well. One of the examples is at kind of the end of the spectrum where teachers are kind of transitioning to retirement, so reducing their workloads. The other end is teachers who have got young families and kind of managing their family commitments and their work commitments. So it can be done, I guess, if you think maybe differently to what's been done traditionally. And then the other element, I guess, is around the non-teaching staff. And in an environment, especially in the post-COVID days, where there's differing or increasing levels of flexibility offered to employees across all industries, schools need to be open to how they can engage in that way as well, or else they're potentially alienating a whole proportion of the workforce who could potentially work for them. But if they're not offered the same uh,
The hybrid arrangement.
hybrid arrangements, yeah, like you say, as other industries may, then they might not be as inclined to take up that role with the school.
Yeah. And what about in other areas? What are you seeing in terms of philanthropy and alumni engagement with schools?
Yeah, that's an interesting space. When you think of the two different kind of circumstances of schools that have been around for a really long time and versus schools that are a bit newer and younger. So in that first situation of those schools that may have been around for 100 or more years, a lot of them have got a really well established kind of philanthropy culture, and a giving culture and well established alumni networks that they tap into and can be a really great resource to kind of supplement the core operating income that the school might be producing. What is interesting that we see, or has been the case over time, is traditionally the way family networks have worked is that boys' schools have often benefited over and above what girls' schools might from the way families are allocating their philanthropic dollar.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that's potentially changing. And our colleagues at JBWeR have done a report around the intergenerational wealth transfer that's coming, and it's significant. And there's also, evidence that shows that more and more decisions around how that philanthropic dollar is spent is resting in the hands of women rather than men. And definitely what we do think and what we see is that represents an opportunity for girls' schools that may not have been there before and so they can focus on and look for the opportunities from that philanthropic dollar that might not be there in the past. In the other vein of kind of those newer schools, ones that, maybe 30 or 40 years old, don't have that really long history, but they're starting to reach some maturity and they're starting to get kind of alumni who have now established themselves professionally and may start to have some wealth that they're looking to kind of give back. Those schools are now starting to think a little bit more about, well, how do we tap into that as well? And it's interesting, some of the discussions we've had and some of the work we've done with schools like that is around the consideration of, well, we don't really have much of a foundation yet. We don't really have much in the way of funds to invest yet. Should we bother? Where do we start? But what we've seen is done successfully, and obviously it's a case by case basis, and every school could kind of consider this in their own circumstance. But there's nothing wrong with starting off small and growing that pool a little bit over time, so that maybe in 10 years' time you've got some money there you've contributed capital to that, it's generated some returns, and now it might be at a level where it's able to support kind of bursaries or scholarships. But yeah, you had to start somewhere.
It's creating the culture in your community, isn't it?
So we are seeing some schools do that. Yeah.
That's really good. What about general value proposition of schools? How important do you think it is for schools to articulate their value proposition in the current economic climate?
I mean, I spoke before about schools have done a good job in terms of managing their affordability, and why we say they've done a good job is because enrollments are still strong. But that's not a cause or a reason to get complacent around it, because school fees will continue to go up. Like the sun will come up, school fees will probably continue to go up. And so they need to really be aware that they need to maintain a proposition for their parents and their students and and their communities that demonstrates value. And so, how do you do that? It's around really articulating what you stand for and what I guess what's different about your school compared to other schools when parents and families are making decisions about where to attend or, whether they stay at a school, they need to really have that value proposition clear. And that is something across our portfolio. We work with a lot of schools, but we also work with a lot of not-for-profit organizations, and that's a real front of mind topic for all those
Yeah, yeah, it
organizations.
would be.
It's around what are we here for? What do we exist for? And how do we articulate our purpose in conjunction with the value that we provide to the community that we're working with?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you say, schools are not-for-profit organisations, and so how do you find that they approach their planning compared to maybe some of your corporate clients and what's going on in the commercial world?
Yeah.
What are you seeing in that space with the schools you work with?
Yeah, I mean, yes, they're not-for-profit organizations, but I generally, prefer to refer to them or use the phrase of for-purpose organizations because, like as we know, you you've got to be running sustainably and
Of
generating
course you do.
surpluses.
Every school's a multi-million dollar business.
Yeah, yeah, to fund your operation and to fund what you're going to do into the future. So that's really important that schools are aware of that. And that's especially important in the what we've spoken about, kind of the rising cost environment that they're facing at the moment. Where I think there's potentially an interesting kind of inflection point for some schools, and maybe it's some of those older, more traditional schools that we spoke about earlier that have been doing something for a really long time. It's part of their culture, it's part of their tradition or the history of what that school represents. But is it still relevant or current in the current time in terms of community expectations and or educational expectations or the way education is delivered? Um, because if it's becoming less relevant and it's got less level of engagement, I guess your your cost of delivery relevant to the outcome you're delivering is increased. So, I mean, maybe a couple of examples of that are some languages which were more popular in the past but aren't so much anymore. Some of those niche sports that don't get a lot of kind of engagement from the students in them. There's still cost to provide that, but if you're not actually getting a lot of, like I said, engagement in those things, are they still relevant at the current time? Um, and should you reassess whether they're relevant in the context of coming back to the purpose and what your ultimate goal is that you're trying to achieve for your students and your community?
You don't want to fall into the trap of just doing what we've always done, but make sure you're engaging with your community and your parent cohort to find out what it is that they're currently valuing.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you come back to that concept of, what can schools learn or take on board from kind of the corporate world? If a business is manufacturing something that no one's buying anymore, they're not going to keep making it. They'll shift to other products that are actually of have a demand, and so it's that constant reevaluation or reassessment of what you're doing, and is it still relevant and current at the time. Probably one other point to make around, I guess, operating in a corporate sense is, and I think some schools do this really well, but potentially there's opportunities for others to do it a little bit better. It's around that kind of utilization of facilities. Schools are big locations with a lot of buildings and amazing facilities, which potentially aren't getting used much after hours or after school hours and outside of school terms. And so, how can you kind of maximize or get the benefit from that capacity that's being underutilized? By engaging other community groups or other opportunities to kind of leverage those facilities for a kind of a commercial benefit. So, like I said, some do that quite well, but I'm sure there are opportunities for others to kind of look into that a little bit further.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You hear quite often banks refer to the schools leveraging their bank as a partner. What does that look like in practice, Damien?
The way that we look at it at NAB and we talk to our clients about it is that I guess there's two things, or you could think of two ways that you kind of engage with your banking partner, or potentially a lot of kind of service providers that schools have. One is the provision of the core service that you're engaged with them for. So for a bank, it's bank accounts, it's systems and processes for collecting and receiving funds or paying funds, and it's funding for projects like we spoke about before. So that's the core element of the service provided by a bank. But we've got our teams at the front line delivering that, but behind us, and NAB's got 40,000 people, there's a lot of other people in the organization with a lot of skills and capability that could potentially be relevant or leveraged for a school. So, I mean, some examples of that are around some programs we've done with some schools around career guidance or early careers education. So NAB has a graduate recruitment program. We've got recruitment teams. What do they look for with people who are entering the workforce, and kind of how can we share that insights with the schools that we work with? Our economics team have spoken to economic students at schools and the like. And then beyond that as well, so they're kind of the people within the bank, but we've got really large and broad networks outside of the bank through our um, stakeholders that we work with and our clients that we work with. There are opportunities to kind of make connections there to support schools in what they're looking to achieve. One thing we've done in the past is, provide a medical researcher that works for an organisation that's a client of the bank to go and present as part of a school's STEM processes. So but where we find that happens well, or we get the opportunity to support in that way, is where there's a real kind of engagement from the school to and the bank to work together to understand, like I said, beyond the surface of what that banking relationship is. What is it that the school is there for? What are they trying to achieve? What are their objectives? What are their challenges in delivering to those objectives? And therefore, what ways can we support you in achieving that? And um, for that to, when that is the most effective is when there's engagement kind of across the school's management layers. So often for a bank and a school, the key relationship is the business manager, and that makes sense. And of course, it will be for the key reasons that we interact. But um, beyond the business manager role, the kind of and when we step into the education side of things, it's the principal, it's the subject heads and the like that will have the insight in terms of the challenges they're facing in delivering the outcomes for the students, and therefore the way that their banking partner or any service provider could potentially work with them.
Yeah, that's excellent. You mentioned in there as well about some of the research that the bank does. Um, have you got anything from the NAB research that tells us about how families are prioritising their education spending at the moment?
Yeah, so through our economics team, we do a lot of research into I guess how people are feeling around the economics pressures that they may be under, or where they're potentially cutting back or not in terms of their spending to manage cost of living pressures. So the data that we have shows that around half of all Australians are looking for ways to cut back and save across typically kind of discretionary spending areas like dining out or holidays or subscription services or things like that. But what the data or the research also shows that only about 8% of people have looked to cut back on their children's educational
That's good
expenses.
news for schools.
Yeah, yeah. So it, it shows that kind of the importance that families and parents place on a really strong education for their children, and the robustness, I guess, of um, the offering that schools are providing and the value that people are seeing in that. But like I said before, while that's a great statistic and kind of a feather in the cap for schools and something that they can kind of in a way, take comfort in, it's not a cause for complacency.
No, it doesn't dilute the essential need for your value proposition to be relevant.
Yeah, that's right. And while we're saying, people are still spending money on education, that could be school fees or it could be kind of the wraparound services like tutoring or extracurricular activities. But when you think of independent schools, there's a quite broad spectrum of schools and school fees across that spectrum. So for in terms of that value proposition, what people are prepared to pay. Um, that it might be, the mid-tier or the lower tier fee schools that may benefit potentially from people seeing the higher fee schools as no longer affordable.
Doesn't mean they're not moving school. Yeah. Okay, good. Oh, well, the next question, probably a bit more personal. You've got a fair bit of experience and history working with not-for-profits and school boards. How does that influence your NAB work with schools?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas there. Well, one is certainly from being on a school advisory board is an awareness or a bit more of an awareness in terms of everything that goes into running a school. I've worked with schools from a banking perspective for over a decade, but most of that is, like I said, kind of engagement with the business manager around kind of financial matters and banking matters. But certainly, there's so much more that goes on beyond that. For business managers, the breadth of their role is huge in terms of operating the business of the school. But then there's also the whole educational side of it, and certainly I've had um, a real increase in awareness in terms of the amount of work that goes into that. The way that educators really do treat their what they do as a vocation and the the real purpose they have about trying to deliver amazing outcomes for their students. But what that does show is it's a really complex um, business that they're operating with a lot of different moving parts that they need to manage. And what I've also seen, I guess, through kind of my experience is the importance of really having great structures and policies and processes in place to support that operation. And where we have seen some schools getting into some financial difficulty over time, there's often been a case there where there hasn't the delineation between kind of management and governance hasn't been kind of honoured, or
Yeah.
it's kind of been blurred.
Fortunately, we see that far too
Um,
often. Hmm.
yeah, that's right. And so what that comes back to is really having those clear policies around how things should work. Um, from a banking perspective, where we see that to be relevant and where we've had discussions with clients, particularly over time, is around things like how do we approach interest rate risk management and how do we approach investment. So it's around having policies in place to support decision making, because ultimately, whether you're the principal or a business manager or a volunteer on the board, you're making those decisions on behalf of the community that is the school, not yourself. So you need to kind of take that decision making beyond, in a way, your personal opinion, although obviously you're bringing your own expertise and experience to support that opinion and the decision made. But the decision should be made in the context of what the school believes should be done. And then that also then protects those people who are, signing off on making that decision, that that decision has been made in context of that policy. And so, you know, if if things go a certain way, not the anticipated way, you can come back and say, well, the decision was made clearly in line with our policy, and not just kind of on a whim or a guess.
Yeah, that's good, very good advice, and it's definitely a perspective that none of school leaders should forget. What does the future of the sector look like from a banking perspective, Damien?
Yeah, well, I think at risk of kind of jumping on the bandwagon of the topic at the moment, like AI is a thing that is very going to impact schools, but it's an opportunity, I think, for schools and all organisations. It's something that we're working through at the bank, but also um, in my role with the school that I work with, we're exploring opportunities there to really leverage AI for the benefit of efficient operations, supporting the teachers in the way that they do things, and creating space and time and capacity for them to move away from the more process orientated nature of what they do to actually spending time with the students. And then it also flows into, potentially how the students use it, because the fact of the matter is, into the future, it's the people that can engage with AI and use it effectively that are the ones that are going to be the most successful, as opposed to those that potentially resist it or are scared by it or just don't understand it. And so students need to be given the skill set to understand it and to work with it. But also what's going to be critical is the kind of the soft skills that AI can't deliver around kind of relationship management and problem solving and things like that are the important skills that will need to be potentially heightened in terms of what is delivered for students from an educational perspective. Another thing, I touched on our research earlier, but something else that we've seen through the research is that 1 in 2 students would like to have or own or operate their own business in the future if they knew how to do it.
No, that's very high, isn't it?
Yeah, and so with the potentially that increasing uncertainty about what the future of work looks like, supporting students with entrepreneurial skills and financial literacy skills will be really important into the future to support them kind of achieve that outcome.
Excellent. Well, really, really good insights today. I really appreciate having the conversation around those thoughts, and thank you very much for your time and coming on with us today. Look forward to catching up again in the future, and all the best. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks, Kenton. Appreciate your time.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Business of School podcast. We've enjoyed the conversation today and would love to have you join us for future episodes. Please hit the subscribe button and follow the links below to find more information and resources to support you and your school team. Until next time, keep being innovative, keep being awesome, and remember, there is always opportunity to improve on the journey. Thanks for connecting.